The woman stepped down from the train car late. The October wind bit through Clara Hollis's traveling cloak as she stepped onto the wooden platform of Dustwell Station. The train's whistle pierced the evening air one last time before the great iron beast lurched forward, leaving her standing alone with 2 worn leather trunks and a past she'd rather forget. She was tall for a woman near 6 feet in her boots, with shoulders that spoke of honest work rather than delicate embroidery. Her auburn hair, pinned severely beneath a practical bonnet, caught the dying light like copper pennies. Beautiful, some might say, though beauty had brought her nothing but grief in St. Louis. The station master, a portly man with tobacco stains on his vest, glanced at her ticket stub. "Miss Hollis, is it got folks meeting you?" "No." The word came out sharper than intended. She softened her tone. "I've arranged lodging at Mrs. Garrett's boarding house." He nodded, eyeing her fine clothes too fine for Dustwell, though she'd already decided they'd be packed away come morning. "It's 3 blocks east, past the general store, though this late might be full up. Cattle drive came through yesterday." Clara hefted 1 trunk. The weight of it pulled at her shoulders, but she'd carried heavier burdens. "I'll manage." The streets of Dustwell were exactly what she'd hoped for, nothing like the cobblestoned avenues of St. Louis, where she'd walked in white satin shoes beside a man who'd promised her the world. Here, dust swirled in small devils, and the wooden sidewalks groaned beneath her boots. Perfect. A place where a woman could disappear into work and silence. Mrs. Garrett's boarding house sat between a saloon and a millinery shop, its yellow paint peeling like old skin. The proprietress herself answered the door, a narrow woman with sharp eyes that took in Clara's height, her traveling clothes, and the absence of a wedding ring in one sweeping glance. "I'm afraid I'm full up. The drovers took every room." Clara had expected this. "I don't need luxury, ma'am. A corner in the kitchen, the barn loft anywhere with a roof." "The barn's full of drunken cowboys who'd think Christmas came early seeing a woman like you." Mrs. Garrett's mouth pursed. "There's the old Hutchinson place, 1/4 mile past town. Roof solid. Well's good, but it's been empty 2 years. Owner lives in Salem now. Might rent it cheap." "How do I find the owner?" "Telegraph office can reach him. Opens at 7. The woman started to close the door, then paused. "You running from something, Miss?" Clara met her gaze steadily. "Running to something, ma'am. A place where I can work with my hands and be left in peace." Something in the older woman's face softened. "Try the livery stable tomorrow. Jake Morrison's always needing help, though he won't like hiring a woman." "I'm good with horses. Better than good." "That's so, Mrs." Garrett studied her again. "Well, there's cold biscuits and bacon in my kitchen. Can't have you starting your new life hungry." The kindness nearly undid her. Clara had steeled herself against curiosity and judgment, but simple human decency caught her off guard. She followed Mrs. Garrett through narrow hallways that smelled of lye soap and boiled cabbage, past closed doors behind which men snored and argued over cards. In the kitchen, she ate quickly while Mrs. Garrett bustled about, pretending not to watch. The biscuits were indeed cold but filling, the bacon more fat than meat. It tasted like honesty, nothing dressed up to be more than it was. "That's a nasty scar on your palm," Mrs. Garrett noted, pouring coffee black as mud. Clara glanced at the white line across her left hand. "Broke a wine glass. Wedding gift from my intended's mother. Crystal from France." She'd gripped it too hard when Charles had stumbled into their wedding suite, drunk and reeking of another woman's perfume. The glass had shattered, cutting deep. She'd wrapped her hand in white silk, her wedding veil, and walked out before he'd even noticed the blood. "Men, Mrs." Garrett said, and that single word held libraries of understanding. Clara found the Hutchinson place by moonlight. It squatted at the edge of town like a forgotten thought, a 2-room cabin with a lean-to that might serve as a stable. The door hung loose on its hinges, but the walls stood straight. Through gaps in the shutters, She glimpsed an iron stove, a rough table, a narrow bed frame. She spread her cloak on the packed earth floor and sat with her back against her trunks. Tomorrow she'd telegraph Salem, find Jake Morrison, begin the transformation from the woman she'd been to the woman she needed to become. Tonight, she simply breathed the sharp, sage-scented air and listened to coyotes singing their lonely songs in the hills. Her mother would be horrified. Clara Ann Hollis raised to pour tea and play Mozart, reduced to sleeping in an abandoned shack. But her mother had also raised her to trust men who spoke sweetly and dressed well, had dressed her in white lace and sent her to a marriage bed that became a battlefield before she'd even reached it. No, better the honest dirt of Dustwell than the false gold of society. Better calloused hands than a ring that meant nothing. Better to heal horses' creatures that didn't lie than pretend her heart hadn't been trampled by promises. She'd told Charles, when he'd finally sobered enough to beg forgiveness, that he'd stolen something from her. Not just her innocence, she was 26, not some sheltered girl, but her faith in the sacred, her belief that when a man said forever, he meant past sunset of the wedding day. "No man will ever have what you took from me," she'd said. "That gift is gone, wasted on someone who didn't deserve it." He'd laughed, actually laughed, and said no decent man would want her now anyway. Maybe he was right, but Clara had stopped caring about what decent men wanted. She cared about what her hands could do, what her knowledge could build. In St. Louis, she'd volunteered at the racing stables, the only place where her height and strength were assets. She'd learned to read the hurt in a horse's eye, to feel the heat of inflammation through hide, to coax trust from creatures betrayed by brutal handling. That was her value now. Not her beauty, not her virtue, not her ability to host dinner parties for 30, just the simple exchange of skill for coin, labor for bread. A horse whinnied somewhere in the darkness, probably from the livery stable she'd seek out tomorrow. The sound was like a welcome, a promise that this hard land might have use for her after all. Clara pulled her cloak tighter and closed her eyes. Let the good women of Dustwell whisper about the strange lady from St. Louis. Let the men look and wonder and scheme. She'd build walls of work and solitude that no sweet-talking man could breach. She'd learned her lesson about fairy tales. Now she'd write a different story, one where the woman saved herself, one day at a time, with no prince required. The coyotes sang her to sleep, and she dreamed of horses running free across endless plains, answering to no one but the wind, the cowboy who asked no questions. The livery stable smelled of hay, leather, and the honest sweat of working animals. Clara stood in the doorway, letting her eyes adjust to the dim interior. She'd traded her traveling dress for a plain cotton work dress and sturdy boots, her hair braided and pinned tight. Still, she knew she looked like what she was, a woman in a man's domain. Jake Morrison sat on an overturned barrel, studying a ledger. He was a wiry man with arms like twisted rope and a permanent squint. He glanced up, took in her appearance, and shook his head before she could speak. "Don't hire women. Nothing personal, miss, but horses ain't tea parties." "I'm not looking for tea parties." Clara stepped forward. "That bay mare in the third stall, she's favoring her left foreleg. Been like that for days, I'd wager. Probably an abscess brewing in the hoof." Jake's squint deepened. "How'd you—" "The way she stands, weight shifted, neck slightly extended. Signs are clear if you know how to read them." Clara kept her voice level, professional. "I can drain it, pack it with drawing salve, have her sound in a week." Before Jake could respond, a voice came from the shadows near the back stalls. "Let her try. Jake." A man emerged from the dimness, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the easy grace of someone comfortable in his own skin. His face was weathered like old leather, with storm-gray eyes that held a peculiar stillness. He wore typical cowboy gear-worn chaps, faded shirt, battered hat, but carried himself differently than the boastful drovers she'd seen in town. "That's my horse," he said simply. "Name's Bo Carter. If the lady thinks she can help Belle, I'd be obliged." Jake grumbled, but gestured toward the stalls. "Your horse, your risk, but if she makes it worse..." I won't. Clara moved to the mare's stall, speaking soft nonsense words as she approached. The bay's ears flicked forward, interested but wary. Clara let her smell her hands, then ran gentle fingers down the leg. The mare flinched when she reached the hoof. May I? She glanced at Carter, who had followed to lean against the stall post. He nodded, saying nothing. Clara lifted the hoof, examining it carefully. The abscess was where she'd suspected, just beginning to push through the sole. She'd need her tools from her trunk, but hot water, clean rags, a sharp knife, and iodine, she said, not looking up. And drawing salve if you have it. Got everything but the salve, Jake admitted grudgingly. I can make it. Need pine tar, sulfur, and... She listed ingredients, still focused on the hoof. Carter moved without being asked, gathering what she needed. He worked quietly, efficiently, never crowding her space. When she needed the knife, it appeared in her peripheral vision. Handle toward her. When she needed more light, he shifted a lantern without her having to ask. They worked in companionable silence for nearly an hour. Clara drained the abscess, cleaned it thoroughly, and packed it with a temporary poultice until she could make proper salve. The mare stood patiently throughout, occasionally nuzzling Carter's shoulder. She trusts you, Clara observed, finally releasing the hoof. We've covered some miles together. His voice was deep, unhurried. You've done this before. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. In St. Louis, volunteered at the racing stables. She waited for the inevitable follow-up questions. What was a lady from St. Louis doing in Dustwell? Why was she working with her hands instead of attending socials? Was she married, engaged, spoken for? Instead, Carter simply said, Belle appreciates it, so do I. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, but Clara shook her head. Settle with Mr. Morrison. I don't work here yet. Jake snorted. Yet you think one lucky guess earns you a job. Weren't no guess, Carter said mildly. She read that horse better than Doc Patterson would have, and Doc's been tending animals for 20 years. Still don't hire women, Jake muttered, but with less conviction. Carter touched the brim of his hat to Clara. I'll bring Belle back in 3 days. Let you check on her, if you're here. He paused at the stable door. Welcome to Dustwell, Miss Hollis, Clara Hollis. Miss Hollis. He said it like it was a complete sentence, then walked out into the morning sun. Jake watched him go, then turned to Clara with a calculating look. Bo Carter don't talk much, but when he does, folks listen. He runs cattle up from Texas, straight as they come. If he vouches for your work. Are you offering me a job? Trial basis. Half wages to start. You muck stalls, tend the sick ones, mix your medicines, no riding out with the men, no breaking horses, and first time I catch you making eyes at the customers. Mr. Morrison. Clara's voice could have frosted glass. I'm here to work with horses, not men. That's all I want. Something in her tone must have convinced him. Well then, start tomorrow. Sunrise. And Miss Hollis Bo Carter's a good man, but he's got his own ghosts. Don't go thinking, I don't think anything about anyone. Clara cut him off. Good day, Mr. Morrison. She spent the rest of the day settling the Hutchinson place. The owner had agreed to rent it for a pittance, probably glad to have someone maintaining it. She scrubbed floors, patched the worst gaps in the walls, and made a list of supplies needed from the general store. By evening, she'd transformed the main room into something livable. Her mother's china tea set, one of the few things she'd brought from St. Louis, looked absurd on the rough pine shelf. But she needed one reminder of who she'd been, if only to measure how far she'd traveled. She was heating beans over the newly cleaned stove when hoofbeats approached. Through the window, she glimpsed Carter dismounting, something bulky in his arms. She opened the door before he could knock. Mr. Carter. Brought firewood. He gestured to a pile of split logs near his horse. "Nights get cold. Figured you might not have had time to lay in supplies." She should refuse. Accepting favors from men led to expectations, obligations. But the practical part of her, the part already calculating how many blankets she'd need, won out. "Thank you. What do I owe you?" He was already unloading the wood, stacking it neatly against the cabin wall. "Nothing. Welcome gift." "I don't need gifts." He paused, straightened, looked at her directly for the first time. In the fading light, his eyes were the color of deep water. "Ma'am, it's just wood, not a marriage proposal." The blunt honesty of it startled a laugh out of her, the first genuine laugh in months. "Fair enough." They worked together unloading the rest. He didn't try to prevent her from carrying her share. Didn't protest that it was too heavy for a woman. When they finished, he stood by his horse, clearly wanting to say something. "Ask your question," Clara said, suddenly tired of waiting for it. He tilted his head. "What question?" "About why I'm here? What I'm running from? Why a woman like me is mucking stalls instead of hosting dinner parties?" "Wasn't going to ask." He swung up into the saddle with easy grace. "Figure if you wanted me to know, you'd say, 'Until then, it's your business.'" Clara studied him. This strange man who brought firewood but not questions, who worked beside her without trying to take over. "Aren't you curious?" He considered this. Curious about lots of things. Whether that bay's hoof will heal clean, if we'll get rain before the week's out, how you knew exactly where to cut to drain that abscess. He gathered the reins. "But I don't think you're a puzzle that needs solving. Miss Hollis, think you just need folks to let you be for a while." He touched his hat brim again and rode off, leaving Clara standing in her doorway with an odd feeling in her chest. Not attraction, she'd cauterized that part of herself, but something like recognition. Here was someone else who understood the value of silence, the gift of being allowed to exist without explanation. She went back to her beans and simple supper, but found herself glancing at the neatly stacked wood. Just wood, he'd said, not a courtship gift or a down payment on future favors. Just one human being recognizing another's need and filling it without fuss. Maybe Dustwell would work out after all, as long as men like Bo Carter kept their distance and their questions to themselves. She could build the quiet life she craved. No entanglements, no promises, no disappointments. Just her and the horses and the slow healing of work, proposals from other men. Within a fortnight of Clara's arrival, word had spread through Dustwell like wildfire through dry grass. A beautiful woman from St. Louis, living alone at the Hutchinson place. Working at Morrison's livery, unheard of. The combination of her Eastern refinement and her peculiar choice of occupation made her irresistible to the local male population. They came like moths to flame, each convinced he had the perfect offer to tempt her from her strange, solitary life. The first was Samuel Greenwood, who owned the largest dry goods store in 3 counties. He appeared at the livery on a Tuesday morning, dressed in his Sunday best despite it being midweek. Clara was mixing a poultice for a mule's cracked hooves when Jake called her over. "Miss Hollis, Mr. Greenwood here would like a word." She wiped her hands on her leather apron, already knowing what was coming from the way Greenwood held his hat and shifted his weight like a schoolboy. "Miss Hollis," he began, his voice pompous with self-importance. "I've been observing your situation. A lady of your obvious breeding, reduced to manual labor. It pains me to see it." "Does it?" Clara kept her tone neutral, though her hands itched to return to the mule. "Indeed, which is why I'm prepared to offer you a position in my establishment. Behind the counter. Naturally, clean work, befitting a lady. The wages would be generous. And in time, well..." He cleared his throat meaningfully. "A businessman of my standing needs a wife who can handle accounts. Host buyers from San Francisco. You'd want for nothing." Clara studied him soft hands that had never known rope burns. A belly that spoke of too many easy meals. Eyes that calculated her value like she was merchandise in his store. That's kind of you, Mr. Greenwood, but I'm content where I am. His face reddened. Content shoveling manure, Miss Hollis. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. Good day, Mr. Greenwood. She turned back to the mule, hearing him sputter behind her before Jake ushered him out. The old stable owner chuckled. That's one down. Want to place bets on who's next? The answer came 3 days later in the form of Thomas Hartley, eldest son of the town's most prosperous rancher. He was handsome in a clean-shaven, straight-backed way that reminded Clara painfully of Charles. He didn't come to the livery but intercepted her on her walk home. Miss Hollis, might I escort you? These streets aren't always safe for a lady alone. She kept walking. I manage fine. Mr. Hartley. He fell into step beside her, undeterred. I've heard about your skill with horses. Impressive. My father's ranch could use someone with your talents. We have over 200 head of horses, the finest in Oregon. And I'm offering you a position, head of our horse breeding program. You'd have your own cottage on the property, assistants to handle the heavy work. My mother would enjoy your company. She misses cultured conversation. Clara almost laughed, as if she'd trade one cage for another, even a prettier one. And what would your future wife think of you installing an unmarried woman on your property? He had the grace to flush. Well, that's just it. I'm not promised to anyone, and a woman who understands ranching, who could be a true partner. He reached for her arm. She sidestepped neatly. No, thank you, Mr. Hartley. I prefer my independence. Independence? His handsome face twisted. Living in that shack, doing men's work. What kind of life is that for a woman? Mine, Clara said simply, and walked faster. But the most persistent was William Harrington, the land speculator who'd made a fortune buying up failed homesteads and selling them to the railroad. He was older, perhaps 45, with silver at his temples and the predatory patience of a successful businessman. He didn't make his move immediately. Instead, he brought his horses to the livery, always when Clara was working, and watched her with dark, calculating eyes. He asked her opinion on feeds, on training methods, on bloodlines. He listened to her answers with apparent fascination. Clara wasn't fooled. She'd seen that look before, the look of a man who enjoyed the hunt more than the prize. After 2 weeks of this dance, he finally showed his cards. Clara was checking on a mare with colic when he appeared at the stall door. I own 1,700 acres north of town, he said without preamble. Good water, sheltered valleys, perfect for raising horses. I need someone who understands bloodstock to manage it. Hire a manager, Clara suggested, not looking up from the mare. I'm trying to... He stepped into the stall. Too close. She could smell his expensive cologne, see the gold watch chain across his vest. Name your salary, Miss Hollis. Build the operation however you see fit. I'm a generous man to those who please me. The implication in those last words made her skin crawl. She straightened, putting the mare between them. I have a job. This, he gestured dismissively at the stable. I could buy Morrison out tomorrow if I chose. Don't you want more from life than this? What I want, Clara said carefully, is to be left alone to work. Nothing more, nothing less. His face hardened. Every woman wants security. Protection. I could give you both. I protect myself. Do you? He moved around the mare, backing Clara against the stall wall. A woman alone, no family, no connections, dangerous position to be in. Before Clara could respond, a mild voice spoke from behind Harrington. Mare's looking poorly. Best give her some room to breathe. Beau Carter stood in the stall doorway. His posture relaxed, but his eyes storm dark. He wasn't looking at Clara, but at Harrington, who took an involuntary step back. Carter, didn't hear you come in. Jake sent me back, said Miss Hollis might need help with the mare. Beau moved into the stall, somehow placing himself between Clara and Harrington without seeming to. Colic can turn bad quick. Appreciate you giving us space to work. It wasn't a request. Harrington's jaw tightened, but he backed out of the stall. "We'll continue this discussion later. Miss Hollis." "No," Clara said quietly. "We won't." After he left, she and Bo worked in silence, walking the mare to keep her from rolling. "Finally," Clara said. "I didn't need rescuing." "Didn't rescue you, rescued the mare. She don't need that kind of upset around her." Despite everything, Clara found herself almost smiling. "Of course, the mare." "Besides," Bo continued, checking the horse's gums, "figured you could handle Harrington just fine. Man's all blow and no bottom. Seen you work, you got steel in you. Just thought you might appreciate not having to prove it in a horse stall." They walked the mare another hour until she began to improve. Bo never asked about the proposals, never offered advice or judgment. When the mare was finally resting comfortably, he simply tipped his hat and left. Word of Clara's rejection spread quickly. Some women in town whispered that she was too proud, holding out for better offers. Others suggested darker reasons for a woman refusing honest proposals. But a few the wives who knew what it meant to be viewed as property. The daughters who'd married for security rather than love they understood. Mrs. Morrison, Jake's wife, brought Clara a basket of preserves one evening. "Don't mind the talk," she said briskly. 20 years ago, I turned down every man in this town before Jake wore me down. Held out for one who saw me as a person, not just a convenience. You hold out for whatever you need to." Clara stood in her doorway watching the older woman walk away, the basket warm in her hands. Not everyone understood her choice, but a few did. That was enough. The proposals slowed after Harrington's failed attempt, though men still watched her with speculative eyes. Let them watch. Let them wonder. She had work to do, horses to heal, a life to build on her own terms. Every evening, she returned to her cabin alone, ate her simple supper alone, slept alone in her narrow bed, and every morning, she woke with the satisfaction of knowing she owed no man anything not gratitude, not explanation, not the pieces of herself she was still trying to mend. The only puzzling thing was the small kindnesses that appeared without explanation. A bag of oats left by her door when feed prices rose. Fresh lumber stacked beside her woodpile when she mentioned needing to repair her shutters. A bottle of good liniment on her workbench at the livery with no note attached. She suspected Bo Carter but never asked. He continued bringing his horses when they needed care, working beside her in comfortable silence. He never presumed, never pushed, never looked at her the way the others did, like she was a problem to be solved or a prize to be won. Sometimes she caught him watching her with those storm-gray eyes. But it wasn't the calculating gaze of the others. It was more like he was watching the weather, observing without needing to possess or change it. Clara told herself she didn't need anyone's kindness, silent or otherwise. But on cold nights when the wind howled around her cabin, she was grateful for that mysteriously appearing firewood. And in the quiet moments at the livery, she found herself listening for the sound of Carter's horse approaching, bringing another creature that needed the healing touch of her hands. It wasn't friendship. It wasn't courtship. It was something else, two solitary souls recognizing each other across the careful distances they maintained. For now, that was more than enough. No man deserves my first night anymore. The autumn evening carried the bite of coming winter as Clara made her way home from the livery. She'd stayed late treating a case of thrush in one of the stage horses, and darkness had settled over Dustwell like a heavy blanket. Her hands ached from the day's work, and she looked forward to nothing more than hot soup and early sleep. But as she rounded the corner near her cabin, she saw a figure sitting on her porch steps. Her hand went instinctively to the knife at her belt, a habit she'd developed since refusing Harrington's advances, then relaxed as she recognized Bo Carter's familiar silhouette. He was bent over something in his lap, working by the light of a small lantern. As she approached, she saw it was a saddle, and his hands were moving steadily with an awl and heavy thread. Blood stained the leather and his fingers. "Mr. Carter!" He looked up, and she saw exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. "Evening, Miss Hollis. Sorry to impose. Was heading back to my place, but this cinch won't hold another mile. Clara climbed the steps and crouched beside him, examining his work. The leather had torn badly, and his repair job, while competent, was being hampered by the poor light in his bloodied hands. "You've cut yourself." Owl slipped. Been a long day. He kept working, but she could see the tremor in his grip. Without thinking, Clara reached out and took the saddle from him. He resisted for a moment, then let go. Something like surprise flickering in his eyes. "Come inside," she said. "I'll do this properly, and you need those hands cleaned before they fester." "I can manage." "I'm sure you can, but you're here now, and I won't have you bleeding all over my porch." She led him inside, lit the lamps, and pointed to a chair. "Sit, water's in the pitcher." While he washed his hands, she examined the saddle more closely. It was good quality, but worn from years of hard use. The kind of saddle a man relied on, cared for, trusted his life to. She gathered her sewing kit, the one she used for delicate horse sutures, and set to work. They sat in companionable silence for a while, him drying his hands carefully, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Finally, he spoke. "You're not what folks expected when you came to town." What did they expect? Some broken bird needing saving, I suppose. Or maybe a husband hunter with fancy ideas. Instead, you're... He paused, searching for words. "A woman who shoes her own horses." Something like that. He leaned back in the chair, and she heard the bone-deep weariness in his sigh. "Been riding since before dawn. Lost 2 head in a canyon, spent all day getting them out." "Did you save them?" "Eventually, though one's got a nasty gash, needs tending. I'll bring her by tomorrow if you've got time." Clara nodded, focused on a particularly tricky section of stitching. "I've been thinking of making a stronger wound salve, something that'll hold up better in wet weather." "That'd be useful." They lapsed into silence again. Clara found herself oddly aware of his presence in her small space. Not threatened, Beau had never made her feel that. Just aware of the way he carefully kept his muddy boots on the mat, the way he held himself still so as not to disturb her work. "I used to think I wasn't good enough," he said suddenly, so quiet she almost missed it. Clara's needle paused. "Good enough for what?" "For the kind of women I thought worth having. Educated women, refined women, women who read books and knew which fork to use." He was staring at his hands, the cuts still seeping slightly. "Spent my whole life feeling rough-made, like I should apologize for the dirt under my nails and the way I talk." Clara set down the awl. "And now?" "Now I figure maybe that's not the measure of a man. Maybe it's what he does when nobody's keeping score." He looked up at her then, those storm-gray eyes direct and honest. "You never made me feel less than. Even that first day, when you could have played the fine lady and put me in my place." Something twisted in Clara's chest. She picked up the needle again, needing the distraction. "You never asked me to be anything but what I am. That's rare. Shouldn't be." The simple truth of it hung between them. Clara finished the last stitch and held up the repaired cinch. "This'll hold now. Better than new, actually." He stood to take it, and their hands brushed in the exchange. Clara felt the calluses on his palm, the honest roughness that spoke of real work, and something long frozen inside her stirred. "Thank you." He reached for his money pouch, but she shook her head. "No payment. You've..." She gestured vaguely at the woodpile, the repaired shutters, the dozen small kindnesses she'd never acknowledged. "Call us even." He studied her for a long moment. "Miss Hollis, can I speak plain?" Clara tensed but nodded. "I know something drove you here. Know it was probably a man. Way you hold yourself careful around folks. And I know it's none of my business unless you make it so." He set the saddle down, choosing his words with the same care he'd use approaching a spooked horse. But I need you to know I'm not angling for anything. Not trying to wear you down or win you over. I just appreciate who you are. The way you move through this world like you've got every right to. Not enough folks do that." Clara's throat felt tight. She turned away, busying herself with putting away her sewing supplies. "I came here with nothing left to give a man. Do you understand that?" "I'm not asking for anything." She laughed, bitter and short. "They all say that at first." "Maybe." He picked up his saddle. "But I mean it." The words that had been building in her for weeks suddenly spilled out. "I was engaged. In St. Louis. Spent months planning a wedding, believing in forever. On our wedding night, he—" She pressed her palms flat on the table. "He came to me already bearing another woman's perfume. Drunk, laughing when I cried. Said I should be grateful he'd shown up at all." Bo said nothing, but she felt his stillness like a held breath. "I left before anything more could happen. But he'd already taken something from me. Not what you might think, not just innocence. He took my belief that when a man says he loves you, he means it past sunset." She turned to face him. "I told him no man would ever get what he was supposed to have. That gift of trust, of faith, of first love, it's gone. Wasted on someone who saw it as his due rather than a treasure." The silence stretched between them. Clara waited for Bo to make excuses, to tell her she was wrong, to assure her that not all men were like Charles. Instead, he adjusted his hat and said quietly, "Then I reckon I'll just have to earn whatever's left, day by day, without asking for what's already been taken." The simplicity of it, the lack of grand promises or protestations, undid her more than any flowery speech could have. "You don't understand. I have nothing left to give. No first anything, no untouched heart to offer. Don't recall asking for your firsts." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Maybe what matters isn't being first. Maybe it's being last. Being the one who stays when the new wears off and the hard times come." He touched his hat brim, that familiar gesture that asked nothing and offered everything, and stepped into the night. "I'll bring that injured cow by tomorrow. Evening, Miss Hollis." Clara stood in her doorway, watching him walk away with that steady cowboy gait. His words echoed in the small cabin. Earn whatever's left. What was left? She'd thought nothing, just ashes and scar tissue and the determination never to be fooled again. But watching Bo's lantern bob through the darkness, she wondered if maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe there were different kinds of treasures than the ones she'd thought stolen. Maybe trust could be built instead of given. Maybe love, if she dared use that word again, could be earned through 1,000 small acts rather than claimed in a single night. She closed the door and leaned against it, fingering the neat stitches in his saddle leather where she'd repaired what was torn. Her hands knew that work, taking something damaged and making it useful again. Not new, not untouched, but strong in the broken places. Perhaps hearts could be mended the same way. Perhaps a man who understood that was worth more than one who expected perfection. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight, she was still Clara Hollis, who'd sworn no man would have what had been wasted. Tomorrow, she'd doctor his cow and accept his quiet presence and pretend her heart didn't skip when he smiled. Time would tell if Bo Carter was different. Time and patience and the slow accumulation of trust, built like a stone wall, one careful piece at a time. She prepared for bed, but found herself standing at the window, looking toward the distant lights of town where somewhere he was riding home on a freshly repaired saddle. A man who asked for nothing but gave anyway, who saw her not as a prize or a problem, but simply as herself. Maybe that was enough to start with. Maybe that was everything. The booth at the winter fair. December arrived with frost on the windows and wood smoke hanging heavy in the air. Dustwell's annual winter fair was the social event of the season, when ranchers from miles around came to trade, sell, and stock up before the snows made travel difficult. Clara hadn't planned to participate, but Mrs. Morrison and several other women had been persistent, pointing out that her healing salves and liniments were better than anything Doc Patterson offered. Folks need good medicine come winter. Mrs. Morrison had argued, you'd be doing a service. So Clara found herself setting up a modest booth in the town square, arranging small jars of horse liniment, healing salve, and the peppermint drops she'd learned to make from an old stable hand in St. Louis. Her display looked humble compared to the merchants from Portland with their bright fabrics and fancy goods. But she wasn't here to impress anyone. The first morning brought a steady trickle of customers, mostly men who knew her work from the livery. They bought liniment and moved on quickly, still uncomfortable dealing with a woman in commerce. But as word spread, wives began approaching, speaking in low voices about their own aches and pains. "This salve," one ranch wife asked quietly, "would it work on people ailments? My back's been something fierce since harvest." Clara kept her voice equally low. "Same principles apply. Inflammation is inflammation. Just use less, it's concentrated." The woman bought 3 jars. By afternoon, Clara had a different sort of clientele. Mothers with children suffering from coughs, elderly folks with joint pain, women with rough hands from lye soap and endless washing. She found herself mixing remedies on the spot, teaching them how to make simple preparations at home. She was grinding peppermint leaves when a shadow fell across her work table. William Harrington stood there, overdressed as always in a city suit, smiling his predator's smile. Miss Hollis, entrepreneurial as well as beautiful. Clara didn't look up. "Mr. Harrington, need some liniment." "What I need is for you to reconsider my offer." He leaned on her table. Too close. Voice pitched for her ears alone. "This little booth is charming, but imagine what you could do with real resources. A proper shop in town, assistance, security. I have what I need. Do you?" His hand moved toward hers on the mortar and pestle. "She does." Beau's voice came from directly behind Harrington, mild as morning, but somehow making the land speculator step back. "Afternoon. Miss Hollis came for more of that hoof salve. Belle's been right as rain since you treated her." Clara looked up, catching the briefest flash of steel in Beau's normally calm eyes. He stood relaxed, hands loose at his sides, but something in his presence made Harrington's confident posture deflate. "Carter, still playing nursemaid to other folks' business?" "Just here for salve." Beau moved around Harrington, effectively blocking him from Clara's space. "Though now you mention it, saw Mrs. Harrington at the ribbon booth. Seemed to be looking for you." The speculator's face darkened. His wife was known for her fierce temper and fiercer jealousy. "This isn't over," he muttered, but left quickly. Clara exhaled slowly. "I really need to stop attracting his attention." "Not your fault he can't hear the word no." Beau examined her display with genuine interest. "These peppermint drops for horses or people?" "Both, actually. Helps with digestion either way." He bought a bag, then surprised her by purchasing several jars of salve. "For the ranch hands, gets brutal in winter." As he counted out coins, Clara noticed other men watching cowboys and ranchers who respected Beau's judgment. Within minutes, she had a line of customers. Beau didn't leave immediately, but took up a position nearby, whittling a piece of wood and chatting with passers-by, his presence a quiet deterrent to anyone else with ungentlemanly intentions. The afternoon grew busier. Word had spread among the women especially, and Clara found herself in the odd position of giving informal medical consultations. She kept her advice general, always careful to recommend Doc Patterson for serious ailments, but for the everyday pains of frontier life. Her remedies were proving popular. A young mother approached hesitantly, a fussy baby on her hip. "Miss Hollis, my little Sarah's been teething something awful. Do you have anything?" Clara mixed a mild preparation of clove oil and showed the woman how to apply it safely. The baby's cries eased almost immediately, and the mother's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Thank you. Doc Patterson just says to give her whiskey, but that don't seem right for a baby." More mothers appeared after that, seeking remedies for colic, rashes, sleeplessness. Clara found herself remembering her mother's gentler teachings before society's expectations had hardened them both. Her mother had known herbs once, had made simple medicines before marrying up and learning to be ashamed of such common knowledge. "You're good with them." Beau's voice startled her from her thoughts. The crowd had thinned as evening approached, and he'd moved closer to help pack up her supplies. "Children don't lie," Clara said simply. "They hurt or they don't. They feel better or they don't. It's honest. Unlike adults." "Exactly." She wrapped the remaining jars carefully. "Thank you for earlier with Harrington. Didn't do anything but buy salve." "We both know that's not true." He shrugged. That economical movement she'd come to recognize as his response to thanks he didn't think he'd earned. Men like that only understand certain kinds of messages. Figured my presence might translate better than your words. They worked together, packing up her booth as the fair wound down around them. Lanterns were being lit, and somewhere a fiddle started playing. The winter fair would continue into the night with dancing and socializing, but Clara had no intention of staying. "You did well today," Beau observed. "Must have sold near everything." "More than I expected." She hefted a box, and he immediately took it from her. She'd learned not to protest. He never implied she couldn't manage, just quietly made things easier when he could. As they walked toward the livery where she'd left her wagon, they passed the main pavilion where couples were beginning to dance. Clara averted her eyes, but not before catching sight of white dresses swirling, men's hands at waists, the intimate public display of courtship and belonging. "You miss it?" Beau asked quietly. "That life." Clara considered lying, then chose truth. "Sometimes, not the restrictions or the emptiness, but the music, the dancing, feeling like I belonged somewhere, even if it was an illusion." "Don't have to be an illusion, just has to be with folks who see you true." She glanced at him, this rough-handed cowboy who spoke in short sentences but somehow always said exactly what mattered. "Do you dance, Mr. Carter?" "When required." A small smile tugged at his mouth. "Though I warn you, I learned from cowboys, not dancing masters, more stomping than style." "I wasn't asking." "I know." He loaded the last box onto her wagon. "But if you ever decide you want to try belonging again on your own terms, I'd be honored to step on your toes while you figure it out." The invitation hung between them, weightless as snowflakes, requiring nothing but offering everything. Clara found herself wondering what it would be like dancing with a man who knew her real name, her real work, her real worth. Not the fantasy Charles had waltzed with, but Clara Hollis, who mixed horse liniment and refused proposals and had hands marked by honest labor. "Maybe someday," she said softly. "Someday's good enough." He helped her up onto the wagon seat, then touched his hat. "Safe travels, Miss Hollis. Lock your door tonight. Fair brings out the rowdy in some folks." She watched him walk back toward the lights and music, his silhouette solid and sure against the festive chaos. Several women tried to catch his attention as he passed, but he moved through them like a ship through water, present but untouched. Clara drove home through the cold night, her empty jars rattling in the boxes behind her. Her purse was heavy with coin, more than a month's wages at the livery. But that wasn't what warmed her against the December wind. It was the memory of mother's relief, of suffering eased, of being useful in ways that had nothing to do with beauty or propriety. It was Beau's quiet protection that claimed nothing, his easy acceptance of her competence, his standing offer of a dance when she was ready, not when he demanded it. She'd told him someday, and found she meant it. Not tonight, when the wounds were still too fresh. Not tomorrow, when trust was still a foreign language she was learning to speak again. But someday, when the broken places had knit strong and she could stand in a man's arms without looking for exits someday, she might let Beau Carter teach her his cowboy dance steps while she taught him that not all educated women needed protecting from life's harder edges. For now, She had winter remedies to make and horses to heal, and a life she was building one independent day at a time. The rest, the dancing, the belonging, the careful reconstruction of faith that could wait for someday. After all, Bo seemed to understand about waiting, about earning, about the difference between taking what wasn't freely given and accepting what was finally ready to be shared. That understanding might be worth more than all the proposals and promises in Oregon territory. Time would tell. The blizzard, the foaling mare, and the night that almost happened. January arrived with teeth. The blizzard struck without warning on a Tuesday evening, turning the world white and deadly within hours. Clara had stayed late at the livery, mixing medicines and checking on a stallion with a persistent cough. By the time she noticed the weather, the snow was already knee-deep and rising. Jake Morrison squinted through the stable doors. "Can't send you home in this? You'd freeze before you made it halfway." "I'll bed down in the hayloft," Clara said, though the thought of a night in the drafty barn made her bones ache already. "The Hendersons' mare," Jake said suddenly. "She's due any day, and they're stuck in Portland. Someone needs to check on her. Their place is just past the church, closer than your cabin, and a damn sight warmer than this barn." Clara knew the mare a sweet-tempered bay she'd examined a week prior. First foaling, which could mean complications. "I'll go." "In this weather, girl, you're—" But Clara was already gathering her medical kit. She'd survived worse than a little snow. The mare needed tending, and that was that. The journey should have taken 10 minutes. In the blizzard, it stretched to nearly an hour. Clara fought through drifts that grabbed at her skirts, wind that stole her breath, snow that blinded her. Twice she thought she was lost. But then the church bell tower appeared through the white fury, guiding her. The Henderson house sat dark and cold, but the barn behind it glowed with lantern light. Clara stumbled toward it, nearly falling as her frozen feet betrayed her. "Who's fool enough to be out in this?" a familiar voice called as the barn door cracked open. Bo Carter stood silhouetted against the warm light, and Clara felt relief wash through her. "The same fool you are, apparently." He pulled her inside quickly, shutting out the howling wind. "Came to check on the mare. Figured the Hendersons wouldn't make it back in this weather." Clara's teeth chattered as she set down her kit. The barn was warmer than outside, but still bitter cold. "How is she?" "Starting labor. I think. Been restless all afternoon." He studied Clara with concern. "You're half frozen. Here." He shrugged off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders before she could protest. It carried his warmth and the scent of leather and hay. "You'll freeze," she protested through chattering teeth. "Got another in my saddlebags. Came prepared to stay the night if needed." He pulled a second coat out and put it on. "Let's see to this mare." The bay was indeed in early labor, pacing her stall with the particular discomfort Clara recognized. Working together, they prepared laying clean straw, heating water on the small stove in the corner, arranging Clara's tools. "First foaling?" Bo asked. "For her, yes, she's young but built well. Should do fine if the foal's positioned right." They settled in to wait, sitting on hay bales near the stove. Clara's fingers and toes burned as feeling returned. Outside, the blizzard raged like something alive and hungry. "Strange how life doesn't wait for good weather," Bo observed, checking the mare again. "Babies come when they come." Clara had assisted at enough foalings to know the truth of it. Human or horse? They talked quietly as the hours passed about horses, about the ranch he worked, about her growing reputation as a healer. Safe topics that skirted around the growing ease between them, the way their movements had synchronized as they worked. Near midnight, the mare's labor intensified. Clara examined her carefully. The foals turned wrong, one leg folded back. Bo's face tightened. He knew as well as she did what that meant. Without intervention, both mare and foal could die. "Can you fix it?" "Maybe, but I'll need your help. It takes strength I don't have." She showed him how to support the mare while she worked. trying to reposition the foal between contractions. It was brutal work, Clara up to her shoulder inside the mare, muscles screaming, Bo holding steady despite the mare's thrashing. Almost, Clara gasped. Just a little more there. She felt the legs slip into position just as a massive contraction seized the mare. Now she can do the rest. They stumbled back, both exhausted. Clara's arm was numb, her dress ruined with blood and fluid. Bo had a fresh cut on his cheek where the mare had caught him with her head. But within minutes, a perfect foal slipped into the world dark like his mother with a white star on his forehead. The mare immediately turned to clean him, nickering softly. Look at that, Bo said quietly. Life finding a way. Clara couldn't speak past the tightness in her throat. Birth always moved her that everyday miracle of something from nothing. Love immediate and fierce. They watched the foal struggle to his feet, wobbling on impossible legs. When he finally found his mother's milk, both humans relaxed. We make a good team, Bo said. Clara looked at him, blood on his face, straw in his hair, grinning like they'd won a prize, and felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, but crack open, like ice giving way to spring. We should clean up, she said, voice unsteady. And look at that cut. They heated more water, and Clara tended Bo's cheek with gentle fingers. This close. She could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his dark hair. A man who'd lived under open sky, worked with his hands, earned every mark on his skin. There, she said softly. Won't even scar. His hand caught hers as she pulled away. Clara. Just her name, but the way he said it like it was something precious, something earned, made her breath catch. I'm so tired, she whispered, of being strong, of being alone, of pretending she didn't feel the pull between them like gravity. I know. He pulled her against him, and she let him, too exhausted to maintain her walls. His arms were solid, safe, warm despite the cold around them. Just rest a minute, nothing else. She should pull away, should remember all the reasons this was dangerous. But the storm howled outside, and new life breathed beside them, and Bo's heartbeat under her ear was steady as earth. If you wanted, she said against his chest. I wouldn't say no, not tonight. She felt him stiffen, then relax. His hand stroked her hair once, gently. That's the cold and exhaustion talking. Maybe, or maybe I'm tired of being careful. He pulled back enough to see her face. Clara, you're half frozen, covered in blood, and we just fought death together. That's not thinking clear. You don't want. Lord help me, I do. The rawness in his voice made her shiver. Been wanting since the day you walked into that stable like you owned the world. But not like this. Not when you're vulnerable and might regret it come morning. I wouldn't regret. Maybe not, but I would. He cupped her face in his work-rough hands. When you come to me, if you come to me, I want it to be in sunshine, with clear eyes and steady hands. Not in a barn, half frozen, looking for warmth. You deserve better than that. We both do. The tenderness in his refusal undid her more than passion would have. Here was a man who wanted her but wouldn't take advantage, who saw her exhaustion and vulnerability and chose protection over possession. You're a strange man, Bo Carter, she said, tears threatening. Just a man who knows the difference between a gift and a debt. He kissed her forehead, soft as snowfall. Let's get you warm and safe. Morning will come soon enough. They made beds of hay near the stove, close but not touching. Clara wore his coat still, surrounded by his scent and warmth. Through the night, they took turns checking the mare and foal, working in companionable silence. When dawn broke clear and cold, the storm had passed. The world outside was transformed white and pristine and new. The foal nursed strongly, the mare content. Bo helped Clara back to town through the deep snow, neither speaking of the night's almost moment, but something had shifted between them, a trust deeper than desire, a partnership proven in crisis. At her cabin door, he touched his hat. "Thank you for saving them." "We saved them," she corrected. "That we did." He smiled, and she saw the promise in it. Someday, when the time was right, when she came to him in strength rather than exhaustion someday. For now, she had new life to tend and winter to survive. But the warmth of his coat around her shoulders lingered long after he'd gone, a reminder that some men knew how to wait for what mattered. That knowledge thawed places in her heart she'd thought frozen forever. Spring was still months away, but something in Clara had already begun to bloom. The people began to see differently. Spring arrived slowly in Dustwell, melting snow revealing the truth of things, what had survived the winter and what hadn't. Clara's reputation had not only survived, but flourished like the early crocuses pushing through mud outside her cabin. The change came in small ways at first. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife who'd previously crossed the street to avoid her, stopped Clara outside the general store. "Miss Hollis, I wonder if I might have a word about my daughter's mare. She's been poorly since foaling." Clara recognized the olive branch for what it was. "Of course. Bring her by the livery, or I can come to you." "Would you tomorrow? Perhaps I'll have tea ready." Tea with the banker's wife. 6 months ago. Clara would have been invited only as a curiosity, a fallen woman to whisper about. Now she was asked for her expertise. The visit went well. Clara diagnosed a retained placenta that Doc Patterson had missed, treating it with herbs and careful management. Within days, the mare recovered, and Mrs. Patterson sang Clara's praises at her weekly sewing circle. "She's not what we thought." Clara overheard Mrs. Patterson telling the other ladies as she passed the millinery shop. "Yes, she lives alone and does men's work, but she saved Isabel's mare, and she was perfectly proper, refused to stay for tea until the work was done." The children were the next to shift the town's opinion. They'd always been less judgmental, drawn to Clara's horses and the peppermint drops she kept in her pockets. But when the Garrett twins fell ill with croup and Clara's steam treatment eased their breathing, word spread through the schoolyard. "Miss Clara fixed us," young Thomas Garrett announced to anyone who'd listen. "Ma says she's better than the doctor 'cause she don't make us take nasty medicine." Soon Clara found herself with a small parade of followers whenever she walked through town, children hoping for peppermints or stories about horses. Their parents, initially suspicious, gradually warmed to anyone their children trusted so completely. But the real change came from an unexpected source. Sarah Morrison, Jake's sharp-eyed wife, had become Clara's quiet champion among the married women. She organized a quilting bee one April afternoon and pointedly invited Clara. "I don't quilt," Clara protested when Sarah delivered the invitation personally. "Neither do half the women who come. It's about gossip and coffee more than stitching." Sarah's eyes twinkled. "Besides, Rachel Henderson wants to thank you properly for saving her mare and foal during the blizzard." Clara knew a command when she heard one. She arrived at Sarah's parlor to find a dozen women assembled, fabric pieces scattered across every surface. The conversation stopped when she entered. "Ladies," Sarah said briskly, "Clara's here to teach us about those headache powders, not to be gawked at. Mary, pour her some coffee." The ice broke slowly. Clara showed them how to mix willow bark for headaches, answered questions about female troubles in language that made some blush and others lean forward eagerly. By the third cup of coffee, she was hearing gossip about everyone in town. "That William Harrington's been sniffing around the saloon girls." "Mrs." Garrett said, needle flashing. "His poor wife." "Poor wife nothing," Sarah snorted. "She's got her own diversions with that traveling salesman." Clara kept her head down, focusing on the simple stitching Sarah had given her. But she felt the women's acceptance settling around her like a quilt. "You know," Rachel Henderson said thoughtfully, "Bo Carter helped save my mare, too. Heard he was there all night with Clara, working together." Several meaningful glances were exchanged. "Good man, Bo," Sarah said neutrally. "Shame he's never married. Must be 35 if he's a day. Waiting for the right woman. Mrs. Patterson suggested. Man like that can afford to be choosy. Smart woman would see his worth, Rachel added. Not many men would spend all night in a blizzard helping with a foaling, expecting nothing in return. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks but kept stitching. These women were about as subtle as a stampede. Speaking of Beau, Sarah said casually, he's been bringing Clara firewood all winter. Jake says he's never seen a man so devoted to charitable work. Very charitable, someone murmured, and giggles rippled through the room. He's a friend, Clara said firmly. Nothing more. Of course, Sarah agreed, too quickly. Just like he's friends with all the unmarried women in town. Oh wait, he doesn't bring any of them firewood. More laughter. Clara found herself smiling despite her embarrassment. There was something healing about being included in women's gentle teasing, being treated as one of them rather than an oddity to be feared or pitied. You could do worse, Rachel said softly. Man who respects what you can do doesn't try to change you, that's rare. Especially one who looks like Beau Carter, someone added, and the room dissolved in laughter again. But beneath the teasing was genuine support. These women, many trapped in marriages of convenience or necessity, recognized something precious in Clara's independence and Beau's patient courtship. They saw a chance for something different, better. The change in the town's perception accelerated after that quilting bee. Women who'd whispered behind their hands now nodded greeting on the street. Men who'd propositioned her now touched their hats respectfully. Even Doc Patterson, initially resentful of her competition, began referring certain cases to her particularly female troubles he found beneath his dignity. Clara's practice expanded beyond horses. She treated colicky babies, arthritic grandmothers, farm wives exhausted from childbearing. She learned to navigate the delicate balance of frontier medicine, knowing when to help and when to defer to the doctor. How to heal without threatening the established order too much. Through it all, Beau remained a constant presence. He no longer had to stand guard at her market booth. Other men had learned to respect her boundaries. But he still appeared regularly, bringing horses that needed care or simply sitting quietly while she worked, whittling and offering occasional observations. Town's coming around, he noted one evening as Clara treated his ranch foreman's gelding for colic. Some of them. She kept her voice neutral, focused on the horse. Sarah Morrison told Jake she's thinking of asking you to deliver her next baby. Clara's hand stilled. That's significant. It is. He studied her face. How do you feel about it putting down roots that deep? She considered the question. 6 months ago. She'd wanted only to disappear, to exist on the margins. Now she had a place here, not the place she'd occupied in St. Louis, defined by marriage and propriety, but one she'd carved out herself. Roots can be good, she said slowly, if they're in the right soil. This soil seems to suit you. She met his eyes across the stable. It's growing on me. He smiled, that slow, rare expression that transformed his weathered face. Glad to hear it. That night, Clara walked home through streets she now knew by heart, exchanging greetings with people who'd become familiar. Mrs. Garrett waved from her porch. The Baker children called out hellos. Even stern Mr. Hensley at the bank touched his hat. She wasn't the scandalous woman from St. Louis anymore. She was Miss Clara, who healed horses and babies, who made the best liniment in 3 counties, who'd earned her place through skill and determination rather than marriage or birthright. At her cabin, she found the usual stack of firewood and something new, a small pot of flowering herbs with a note, "For your medicine garden, B." Clara touched the delicate leaves, breathing in the scent of mint and thyme. Roots, indeed. Not just in soil, but in community, in purpose, in the quiet understanding of a man who brought herbs instead of roses. The woman who'd stepped off the train last October would barely recognize this life. But then, that woman had been running from something. This woman, Clara Hollis of Dustwell, Oregon was building something instead. And maybe, just maybe, she was building it with room for two. The proposal unlike any other. The evening was soft with early summer warmth. Crickets singing their ancient songs as Clara finished tending her medicine garden. The herbs Beau had given her had flourished, joining the other plants she'd cultivated. She loved this time of day, when the work was done and peace settled over her small homestead like a blessing. She heard his horse before she saw him, that familiar steady gait of Belle, the mare she'd treated so many months ago. Beau appeared at her gate, not dismounting immediately, just sitting easy in the saddle watching her work. "Evening, Clara." "Beau." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. "Something wrong with Belle?" "No, she's fine. Best she's been." He swung down, landing with the grace that never failed to catch her attention. "Came to talk, if you've got time." Something in his tone made her heartbeat quicken. They'd fallen into such comfortable rhythms over the months, him appearing with wood or supplies, her treating his horses, both of them sharing quiet conversations that required no promises or declarations. But tonight felt different. "Coffee," she offered. "That'd be good." They sat on her porch as the coffee brewed, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. Beau seemed content with silence at first, whittling a piece of pine into something that might become a whistle. "Been thinking," he said finally. Clara waited, having learned that rushing Beau was like rushing the seasons futile and missing the point. "About time," he continued. "How it changes things, how it doesn't." She poured the coffee, strong and black the way they both liked it. "What brought this on?" "Sam Morrison got engaged. To that schoolteacher from Salem. I heard they seem well suited." "They do." He set down his whittling, looking at her directly. "Made me realize I've been waiting without saying what I'm waiting for. That's not fair to either of us." Clara's hand tightened on her cup, but she kept her voice steady. "What are you waiting for?" "You know what?" His gray eyes held that storm intensity she'd first noticed. "But I need to say it plain. I'm waiting for you. Clara, been waiting since the day you told me no man deserved your firsts anymore." The words hung between them like morning mist, tangible but fragile. "I won't buy you a ring," he continued, voice steady and sure. "Won't put something on your finger that feels like a chain, but if someday you decide you want a partner, not a master, not someone to complete you, just someone to stand beside, then I'll be here." Clara felt tears threaten, but they weren't the bitter tears of St. Louis. These were something else, something that felt like spring rain on drought-hard ground. "I don't need you to make me whole," Beau said softly. "You're already whole. I'd like to see where we could go together, if you're willing." "You make it sound so simple," Clara whispered. "It is simple. Not easy, nothing worth having is easy. But simple." He leaned back in his chair, giving her space. "I know what I'm asking. Know you've got scars that might never fully fade, but I've got my own. Maybe that's why we fit." Your scars, she'd wondered but never asked, respecting his privacy as he'd respected hers. He was quiet for a long moment. "Had a wife once, Mary, sweet little thing, delicate as china. Tried to make a ranch wife of her, but she wasn't built for this life. The isolation, the hard work, it broke her. She took fever one winter and just gave up, didn't fight it." Clara reached out instinctively, covering his hand with hers. "Blamed myself for years," he continued. "Thought I should have known better. Should have taken her back east where she belonged. Took me time to realize we were just wrong for each other. No amount of loving could change that." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. It taught me something. Taught me to see people as they are, not as I wish they were. To value strength over beauty, partnership over possession." He turned his hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You're nothing like Mary. You face this life head on, make it yours. That's something powerful." They sat in silence as darkness gathered, hands linked, heart speaking truths too deep for words. "I'm not asking for an answer tonight," Bo said eventually. "Not asking for promises or pledges. Just wanted you to know where I stand. I'll keep standing here building my ranch, bringing my horses, being your friend whether or not you decide you want more. And if I never decide, then I'll be the luckiest man in Oregon to have Clara Hollis as a friend." He squeezed her hand gently. "But I hope someday you'll want to try for more. When you're ready. If you're ever ready." Clara thought about all the proposals she'd received since coming to Dustwell. Grand promises of wealth and security. Attempts to save or tame or own her. Not one of them had offered what Bo did: patient understanding. Genuine partnership. Love without conditions. "I'm making you something," she said suddenly. "Oh, a coat for winter." She felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I noticed yours is getting worn." A slow smile spread across his face. "That's fine, Clara, that's real fine." He understood, as she'd known he would. Not a yes, not yet, but a beginning. A sign that she was thinking of him, planning for him, making space in her life even if she couldn't name it yet. "There's a dance next month," he said as he prepared to leave. "Harvest celebration. If you wanted to go just as friends, nothing more, I'd be honored." Clara thought of that winter night when she'd watched the dancers with longing and loss. Thought of his offer to teach her his cowboy steps when she was ready to belong again. "Maybe," she said, "ask me closer to time." "I will." He touched his hat, that familiar gesture that had become dear to her. "Night, Clara, lock your door." "Night, Bo, safe travels." She watched him ride away. Belle's hoofbeats steady as a heartbeat in the darkness. Then she went inside to work on his coat, each stitch a small act of faith, a tiny promise that maybe she was healing enough to risk hoping again. The coat took shape under her hand, sturdy wool lined with soft flannel, built to last through hard winters and long years, built like trust, one careful piece at a time. Outside, summer lightning flickered on the horizon, bringing the promise of rain. Clara worked by lamplight, humming softly, adding pockets deep enough for a man who carried fence tools and horse treats and small kindnesses. She thought about partnerships, not the fairy tale she'd believed in with Charles. All sweetness and light until reality intruded. This would be different. A partnership of equals, built on respect and shared work and the quiet understanding that some wounds never fully healed but could still be lived with. When she finally set the sewing aside, the storm had arrived in earnest, rain drumming on her roof like approval. She stood at her window, watching lightning illuminate the landscape in brief, brilliant moments. "No rings," she said aloud, testing the words. "No chains, just choice, renewed each day." It wasn't conventional. The good women of Dustwell might whisper, but they whispered already. And Clara had learned their gossip had no teeth when faced with genuine respect and proven worth. Besides, Bo was right. They fit not like puzzle pieces made to interlock, but like two trees growing side by side, each complete but stronger for the other's presence. The dance was a month away. By then, the coat would be finished. By then, she might be ready to say yes to more than friendship, to risk her scarred heart on a man who brought herbs instead of roses and offered partnership instead of protection. Or maybe not. The beauty of Bo's proposal was that either answer was acceptable. He'd wait, bringing firewood and conversation and that slow smile that made her feel like spring after endless winter. Clara blew out the lamp and prepared for bed, rain singing her to sleep. Tomorrow she had horses to tend and remedies to mix and a life to continue building. But tonight, she allowed herself to dream of dancing with a man who knew her true worth and valued it above all else. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better a real beginning, chosen with eyes wide open and hands ready to work. The kind of beginning that might, with patience and courage, grow into something lasting. Something worth the wait. The town fire she didn't run, he didn't fall. The august heat had baked Dustwell dry as kindling. For weeks, the sky remained cloudless, the air thick with dust and the smell of cured grass. Everyone moved carefully, spoke quietly, as if loud noises might spark the disaster everyone feared. It started on a Tuesday afternoon. Clara was at the livery, treating a case of strangles in one of the stage horses, when young Tommy Baker burst through the doors. "Fire! The mercantile's on fire!" Clara's blood went cold. The mercantile stood in the heart of town, surrounded by wooden buildings dried brittle by the drought. If it spread... "Tommy, run to the church! Ring the bell!" Jake Morrison commanded, already moving. "Clara, get the horses out. All of them. Take them to the east pasture." But Clara was already leading the first horse out, working with an efficiency born of crisis. She'd seen fire take a stable in St. Louis once the memory of screaming horses still haunted her dreams. "Where's the fire brigade?" she asked Mrs. Morrison, who'd appeared with her arms full of bridles. "Fighting it, but the water wagon's running low. This drought." The older woman's face was grim. Clara worked faster, leading horses two at a time when she could manage it. The air grew thick with smoke, and she could hear shouting from the town center. Through the stable doors, she glimpsed an orange glow painting the afternoon sky. She was leading out the last pair, including the stage horse she'd been treating when Beau appeared, his face streaked with soot. "Clara, thank God, the fire's spreading to the feed store. Wind's pushing it toward the stables. These are the last..." She handed him the lead ropes. "Take them. I need to get my medicines." "Clara, no." But she was already running back inside. Her medicine chest contained months of work tinctures, salves, dried herbs that couldn't be quickly replaced. More importantly, it held the laudanum and other pain remedies that might be desperately needed if anyone was injured. The smoke was thicker now, stinging her eyes. She grabbed the chest, then remembered the surgery kit Doc Patterson had left for her to clean. She couldn't leave it. Those instruments could save lives. She was heading for the door when a burning timber crashed down from the loft, blocking her path. Fire licked along the fallen beam, spreading to the straw scattered on the floor. For a moment, panic clawed at her throat. Then she heard Beau's voice, clear and calm despite the chaos. "Clara, the back door." She ran, chest clutched against her body, smoke burning her lungs. The back door stood open, Beau silhouetted against it. He grabbed her arm the moment she emerged, pulling her away from the building. "Fool woman," he growled, but his hands were gentle as he checked her for burns. "Risking your life for medicines." "Might need them," she gasped out, coughing. "Might need you more." But he took the chest from her, and together they ran toward the bucket brigade forming between the town well and the spreading flames. What followed was a battle measured in buckets and sweat and sheer determination. The formal fire brigade had given up on saving individual buildings, focusing instead on creating fire breaks. But the townspeople refused to surrender their homes so easily. Clara found herself in a line with Mrs. Patterson, Rachel Henderson, and a dozen other women, passing buckets with mechanical precision. Her arms screamed, her back ached, but she didn't stop. Beside her, Rachel's fancy dress was ruined, her hands already blistering, but she kept working. "Never thought I'd be doing this," Rachel panted between buckets. "Life has a way of surprising us," Clara replied, thinking of her own journey from St. Louis ballrooms to this moment. The men worked the dangerous end of the line, throwing water on flames that seemed to laugh at their efforts. Clara glimpsed Beau among them, his shirt abandoned, muscles working steadily as he directed the water where it would do the most good. Then the wind shifted. It happened in an instant. The flames that had been pushing toward the residential section suddenly turned back on themselves, toward the already burned buildings and away from the intact structures. "Keep going," someone shouted. "We might save the rest." They worked until their hands bled and their voices gave out from the smoke, when the last flames finally died, leaving only smoking ruins where 6 buildings had stood. The entire town stood in exhausted silence. Clara found herself sitting on the ground, back against a water trough, surveying the damage. The mercantile was gone, along with the feed store, 2 storage sheds, and part of the livery's hay barn. But the stable itself stood intact. The houses were safe, and miraculously, no one had died. "You saved the horses." Beau's voice came from above her. He looked like he'd been through war, covered in soot and sweat, a burn across his forearm, his face etched with exhaustion. "We all saved them." She tried to stand, swayed, and his hand steadied her. "Your arm needs tending." "Later." "Now," she insisted, finding strength in having something useful to do. Infection doesn't wait for convenient times. They made their way to the church, which had become a makeshift medical station. Clara's saved medicine chest proved invaluable as she and Doc Patterson worked side by side, treating burns and smoke inhalation. "Good thinking, saving this," the doctor admitted gruffly as Clara handed him burn salve. "Would have taken weeks to replace." She cleaned and dressed Beau's burn while he sat stoically on a church pew. Around them, the town nursed its wounds and counted its blessings. "Could have been worse," Sam Morrison said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders. "If that wind hadn't shifted." "But it did," his wife said firmly. "And we're all here. Buildings can be rebuilt." Old Mr. Crawford, whose general store had competed with the mercantile for 40 years, stood up slowly. "John Garrett lost everything in that fire. His store, his inventory, his family's livelihood." He looked around the church. "I say we rebuild it. All of us. Together." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "I've got lumber," one rancher called out. "I can spare 2 hands for a week," another added. Clara felt something swell in her chest, not the smoke damage, but emotion. This was community. This was belonging. "I'll donate medicines," she heard herself say, "for anyone who needs them during rebuilding." Beau's hand found hers, squeezed gently. As plans took shape around them, Clara became aware of how she and Beau must look sitting close on the pew, her hand in his, both covered in soot and sweat but unmistakably together. She waited for self-consciousness, for the old urge to pull away. It didn't come. Mrs. Crawford approached them, her usually stern face soft with something like approval. "Saw you 2 during the fire, working like you'd been partners for years. It's a good thing, finding someone who stands with you when trouble comes." After she moved on, Clara and Beau sat in companionable silence, watching their neighbors transform disaster into determination. "You didn't run," Beau said quietly. "When the fire came toward the stable, you ran in, not away." "Neither did you. You came to find me." "Always will." The simple certainty in his voice made her throat tight. She thought of all the times Charles had promised to stand by her, only to crumble at the first test. Beau made no grand promises, he just showed up, steady as sunrise. "That coat I'm making you," she said, surprising herself. "It'll be ready soon." He smiled, that slow, transforming expression she'd come to treasure. Looking forward to it, though after today, might need to patch some holes. "I'm good at mending things." "Yes," he said, looking at her with those storm-gray eyes. "You are." Later, as the town began the long walk home through streets that smelled of char and determination, Clara found herself surrounded by people who'd fought beside her. Women who'd passed buckets until their hands bled. Men who'd risked burns to save their neighbor's property. Children who'd carried messages and water to the workers. This was her town now. Not because she'd married into it or bought her way in, but because she'd earned it bucket by bucket, horse by horse, remedy by remedy. At her gate, Beau paused. "Lock your door tonight. A lot of upset folks might make poor decisions." "Aren't you tired of telling me that?" "Never tired of keeping you safe, even when you're determined to run into burning buildings." She laughed, actually laughed, despite the exhaustion and the losses. "Pot calling the kettle black? Mr. Carter. Fair point. He touched his hat brim. The gesture now so familiar it felt like a caress. Rest well, Clara. Tomorrow we start rebuilding. Together. Together. As she watched him disappear into the smoky darkness, Clara realized she'd already made her decision about the harvest dance, about the future, about the patient man who'd waited without pushing. Fire had tested them all today, and in that testing, she discovered something precious. She and Bo didn't just work well together in calm times. They stood together when the world burned, each making the other stronger. If that wasn't a foundation for partnership, she didn't know what was. And that night, it was no longer first, just the right time. September arrived with golden light and the promise of harvest. The town had rebuilt with remarkable speed. Neighbors helping neighbors. The shared adversity of the fire forging bonds stronger than any social convention. Clara had never felt more part of Dustwell than she did now. Her medicine chest depleted, but her heart full from all the healing she'd been able to provide. The harvest dance was 3 days away when Clara put the final stitches in Bo's coat. She held it up in the lamplight, examining her work with critical eyes. The wool was dark brown, practical but fine, with brass buttons she'd ordered from Portland. The lining was soft flannel in deep blue, an indulgence. But she'd wanted something that would feel gentle against work-worn skin. She folded it carefully, wrapped it in brown paper, and set it aside. Tomorrow she'd decide whether to give it to him before the dance or after. Tonight, she had other preparations to make. Her good dress, the last remnant of her St. Louis life, hung on the back of her door. Pale green silk. Too fine for Dustwell, really. But she'd saved it for reasons she couldn't quite name. Now she knew why. She wanted Bo to see her in it once, to understand what she'd chosen to leave behind and what she'd chosen to become. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Bo standing in the evening light, hat in hand, a peculiar expression on his face. "Clara, sorry to call so late. Is something wrong, one of the horses?" "No, nothing like that." He shifted his weight, and she realized with amazement that he was nervous. "I came to ask, that is, I wanted to make sure, the dance on Saturday, you never gave me an answer." She studied him, this man who'd faced fire without flinching, who'd waited months without pushing, who now stood on her doorstep like a schoolboy asking for his first dance. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll go with you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise after a long night. "I'll call for you at 7. "I'll be ready." He turned to go, then paused. "Clara, wear something you can dance in. I meant what I said about teaching you those cowboy steps." After he left, Clara stood in her doorway, heart beating fast as a girl's. How strange, to feel this way at 27, after everything. But perhaps that was the gift, to choose joy after sorrow, to risk hope after betrayal. Saturday came crisp and clear. Clara spent the day on mundane tasks, trying to calm the flutter in her stomach. She helped deliver the Hendersons' new foal, mixed remedies for the general store's new stock, and pretended she wasn't counting the hours. At 6, she began preparing. The green silk whispered against her skin like memory. She pinned her hair softer than usual, allowing a few tendrils to escape. In her mirror, she saw both the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become, Clara Hollis. Neither St. Louis belle nor frontier spinster, but something uniquely her own. Bo arrived precisely at 7, and the look on his face when she opened the door was worth every moment of doubt she'd ever had. Clara, just her name, but weighted with such appreciation that she felt beautiful for the first time since that horrible wedding night. He dressed with care, too clean-shaven, wearing what must be his best shirt, boots polished to a shine. But it was the way he looked at her that mattered, not like she was a prize or a conquest, but like she was Clara, and that was everything. "You clean up well, Mr. Carter," she said, suddenly shy. "You always look beautiful. Tonight you just look beautiful in silk instead of cotton." The simplicity of the compliment, acknowledging her everyday beauty rather than treating this as a transformation, made her throat tight. "I have something for you," she said impulsively, retrieving the wrapped coat. "I finished it yesterday." He unwrapped it slowly, his hands reverent on the wool. When he held it up, examining the careful stitching and brass buttons, something shifted in his expression. "Clara, nobody's ever made me anything like this." "Try it on." The coat fit perfectly, broad through the shoulders, long enough to protect against winter winds. He ran his hands over the wool, and she saw him discover the inner pockets she'd added for the small things he always seemed to be carrying. "How did you know?" "I pay attention." She smoothed the collar, allowing herself that small intimacy. "You're always pulling things from your pockets, fence wire, horse treats, that knife you whittle with. Figured you needed proper places for them." He caught her hands, holding them against his chest where she could feel his heartbeat, strong and slightly fast. "This is more than a coat." "Yes," she admitted. "It is." They stood that way for a moment, the promise of the evening stretching before them like an open road. Then Beau stepped back, offered his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. "Shall we go show this town how it's done?" The dance was already in full swing when they arrived. The Garrett's barn had been transformed with lanterns and autumn leaves. The floor cleared for dancing. A small band of local musicians played with more enthusiasm than skill, but the music was lively and sincere. Their entrance caused a minor stir. Clara Hollis in silk, on Beau Carter's arm, both of them glowing with something that looked suspiciously like happiness. She saw Sarah Morrison elbow her husband, saw Rachel Henderson smile behind her fan, saw even stern Mrs. Crawford nod approval. "Ready?" Beau asked, leading her toward the dance floor. "I haven't danced since St. Louis. I might be rusty." "Then we'll be rusty together. I haven't danced since Mary." The admission hung between them for a moment, both of them bringing ghosts to this new beginning. Then the fiddle struck up a reel, and Beau drew her into the dance. He hadn't lied about learning from cowboys. His style was more enthusiasm than elegance, but his hands were sure and his lead was clear. Clara found herself laughing as they stomped and spun with the others, her silk dress swirling like water. "See," he said as they paused between songs. "Not so different from working horses. Just gotta feel the rhythm and trust your partner." "Is that what we are, partners?" His gray eyes turned serious. "I'd like to be in all things, if you'll have me." Before she could respond, the band struck up a waltz, slower, more intimate. Beau raised an eyebrow in question, and Clara stepped into his arms. This was different. This was memory and possibility wound together as they moved in gentle circles. Clara could feel the strength in his arms, the careful way he held her close enough to guide. Not so close as to presume. "I used to dream about dancing at my wedding," she found herself saying. "Had it all planned, the music, the flowers, the way love would feel like flying. And then I learned that some men see dancing as just another way to show ownership. Charles liked showing me off, but he never actually saw me." "His loss." Beau's hand tightened slightly on her waist. "Though I'm selfish enough to be grateful for it." "Are you?" He spun her gently, bringing her back closer than before. "Would you be here if he'd been the man you thought he was? Would I have ever known Clara Hollis, who doctors horses and faces down fires and makes the finest coat a man could ask for? I suppose not. Then yes, I'm grateful. Not for your pain, never that, but for the path that brought you here, to this moment, dancing with me in a barn that smells of hay and hope." Clara looked up at him, this patient man who'd waited without pushing, who saw her strength as a gift rather than a threat. "Take me home, Beau." Something flared in his eyes. "Clara!" "I know what I'm asking. I know what I'm choosing." She touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of his jaw. I'm not running from anything tonight, not cold or loneliness or bad memories. I'm running toward something, toward you. They left quietly, though Clara felt the weight of knowing looks following them. Let them talk. She'd earned the right to choose her own path. The ride to Beau's ranch passed in charged silence. Clara had never been to his home, though she'd treated his horses often enough. It was neat and sturdy. Like the man himself, a solid house with a wide porch. Corrals well-maintained, everything speaking of pride without ostentation. Inside, he lit lamps with hands that trembled slightly. "Clara, we don't have to—" She silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her certainty into that connection. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, she said, "I thought no man deserved my first night anymore. And I was right. That girl, that gift that's gone." "I know. But you don't want my first night. You want my last night, my every night, my choosing you again each morning night." "Yes." The word was rough with emotion. "That's all I've ever wanted. Then have me, not the girl I was or the woman I might become, but who I am right now. Battle scars and all." He cradled her face in his work-worn hands. "You're perfect, exactly as you are." And that night, in the quiet of his simple room, Clara discovered that some gifts could be given more than once, that trust could be rebuilt, stronger in the mended places, that making love with a man who truly saw her was nothing like the taking she'd feared on her wedding night. They moved together with the same easy partnership they'd found in work, learning each other's rhythms, attentive to each other's needs. There was laughter mixed with passion, tenderness threaded through desire. When Beau traced the scar on her palm, that old wound from the shattered crystal, and kissed it like a benediction, Clara felt something broken inside her finally heal. Later, wrapped in his arms and his new coat which she'd playfully stolen, Clara watched moonlight paint patterns on the wall. "No regrets?" Beau asked, his voice drowsy with contentment. "None. You. Only that it took us so long to get here. Maybe we needed that time, to know for certain." "And do you know for certain?" Clara turned in his arms, meeting those storm-gray eyes that had first seen her truly. "I know that I choose you, not because I need saving or completing, but because you make me more myself. Is that enough?" "It's everything." They married a month later, in the church where they'd treated fire victims together. Clara wore her green silk again, having decided it deserved better memories. Beau wore his coat, brass buttons gleaming. The whole town turned out, even William Harrington with his sour grapes expression. There was no talk of obedience in their vows. Instead, they promised partnership, respect, and the daily choice to stand together. When Beau kissed his bride, the cheers could be heard clear to the livery. Clara kept her cabin as a workshop, her healing practice flourishing alongside her new life as a rancher's wife. She birthed babies and foals with equal skill, mixed medicines that eased pain throughout the county. Beau expanded his operation, known for the finest horses in Oregon and the happiest wife. They danced at every social gathering, Beau's cowboy steps growing smoother while Clara's silk gave way to practical calico that swirled just as prettily. And every night, whether in passion or simple companionship, they chose each other again. The girl who'd stepped off the train in Dustwell believing love was dead had been wrong. Love hadn't died, it had just been waiting for the right soil to grow in, the right partner to tend it with. And in the end, that made all the difference. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please comment below and share your thoughts about Clara and Beau's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love, redemption, and finding partnership in the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850 and hit that like button. And don't forget to click the hype button to help more people discover these stories of courage and hope from the American frontier. Until next time, partners.